I want to transition a little bit to talk
Yeah.
about immigration. So I don't want to do a broad overview of the Immigrant Trust Act. I just want to focus on one thing that I found very interesting in that act. What is the mechanism by which that act would prevent local law enforcement from cooperating with federal immigration enforcement?
Right. So the Immigrant Trust Act is a bill that would limit cooperation between local law enforcement and other agencies with federal immigration enforcement. And it would limit information sharing and things like that. The Immigrant Trust Act is predated by the Immigrant Trust Directive, which is a directive from the Office of the Attorney General that basically says that local law enforcement shall not share information with federal law enforcement when it comes to immigration status and things like that. The AG's office has unique power in New Jersey in that it's different from many other attorney general's offices across the country. The AG's office has the ability to set binding policy for all law enforcement agencies and prosecutors in the state. And so, they can say through directive that law enforcement can no longer communicate with ICE or other people unless it's germane to the investigation in some way. The Immigrant Trust Directive would the Immigrant Trust Act, excuse me, would codify the Immigrant Trust Directive and then extend it to other agencies as well. Because we know that there are other agencies in New Jersey that have the ability to collect information on immigration status and have the ability to share that with the federal government, but this would prevent them from doing so. And in terms of the question about the mechanism, it would be a violation of law for agencies to engage in that sort of information sharing should the Immigrant Trust Act pass. And so, it would be a series of, I would imagine there would have to be regulatory policies written and agency policies written to make sure that they are complying with the Immigrant Trust Act. And it would, require a lot of vigilance and implementation to make sure that we're doing it right.
And what another aspect that I wanted to understand is the enforcement of it, because I understand that it would be illegal for them to cooperate with other
Yeah.
agencies if that law were to be codified. But what I've seen that is in public defender offices, prosecutor offices, and even with law enforcement, a lot of these things are kind of automated, right? Like there are softwares that kind of just flag a person's immigration status and they get an ICE hold that puts them in a separate category. We have to do the immigration processing as well to help them get out of custody. And there are risks to getting them out of custody because now that they've been flagged, they're technically ripe for deportation.
Yep.
If ICE wanted to pick them up, they could. The law sounds great. I'm just curious as to how these little nitty gritty enforcement things will actually happen in real life.
Yeah, so one aspect that could happen is disassociating with those pieces of software and those databases, right? So there are databases that collect that information and share it automatically with ICE or federal law enforcement. And so we would need to make sure that we're not participating in those spaces
Gotcha.
anymore. There's also routine information sharing about who's getting out of prison or who has a court date and things like that's happening in states across the country where you see ICE agents show up to court and detain people right after their court hearings. And I know that New York is fighting this right now, and they're trying to stop ICE agents from doing that because not only does that cause harm to that family after the court hearing, it also is a deterrent to for people to show up to court in the first instance, right? And so it undermines the justice system as a whole if we allow for ICE to run rampant in our courts.
Absolutely. So I just want to put the Immigrant Trust Act within the context of the New Jersey gubernatorial race. So we know that back in May, Mayor Ras Baraka went to visit Delaney Hall along with a few Congress people. He got arrested. And since then, he's been very vocal about denouncing Trump's immigration crackdown, but he specifically supports the Immigrant Trust Act. He said that on his campaign trail. I believe he said that in debates as well. And at a specific governor's debate in February, there were 6 Democratic candidates on stage, and they were all asked if one of the goals of the next governor should be protecting immigrants in the state, whether they're here legally or not. And every Democratic candidate raised their hand except for Representative Mikie Sherrill. And in that same debate, Representative Gottheimer went on to criticize the Immigrant Trust Act, saying that there are legal risks. Representative Sherrill said the same thing, that the legislation and language need tweaks. So, from the ACLU's perspective, are there legal risks? What are they? And why is that a problem?
Yeah, I'll say this: the Immigrant Trust Directive, the AG directive that I mentioned, it's been challenged in court and it survived judicial scrutiny. And so, in fact, it survived on multiple occasions, including in one instance before a Trump-appointed judge. And
Right.
so we've seen the Immigrant Trust Directive succeed in court. Been upheld as constitutional. It's allowed to live on, and it's continued to be binding policy for New Jersey's law enforcement across the state. I think that there is good reason to believe that the Immigrant Trust Act would withstand such scrutiny as well.
Right.
And there is good reason to believe that we will succeed should the Immigrant Trust Act be challenged in court. And look, just because there may be some legal concerns, I'll admit it. Like, there's 100% chance that if the Immigrant Trust Act passes, there are going to be people that sue regarding it, right? Like,
Yeah,
a hundred
absolutely.
percent that there will be a lawsuit trying to challenge the Immigrant Trust Act. But you know, whoever our next governor is should not only pass policies that they're not going to get sued about, right? Like, they should. You can't be in government if you're afraid of being sued. And so it's really important that we do what's right for New Jerseyans, regardless of whether or not we may face a lawsuit as a state in the future. And there's good reason to believe that we'll be able to succeed in a lawsuit, just as we did with the Immigrant Trust Directive. And the Attorney General of our state, and w- even with pieces of legislation where he's flagged legal concern, it is their responsibility to defend the laws of New Jersey. And so, if the Immigrant Trust Act is part of the legal infrastructure of New Jersey, the Attorney General's office is going to defend it. And they have some of the best lawyers in the country. And I firmly believe that we will it survive any sort of judicial scrutiny. I think the legal risks are overstated, and I also think that the potential benefits of it are understated. And so I'll also say that it's been said that the Immigrant Trust Act won't protect people from deportation. It will only limit information sharing. It's not going to. So there are some lawmakers and gubernatorial candidates that have said they don't want to give people false hope. Well, look, there is no panacea. There is no silver bullet. All we can do is try to chip away at the onslaught of attacks that our communities are facing. And all
Right.
we can do is put up as much of a firewall as possible against the Trump administration's agenda. And so, if our answer is to do nothing, then that's not unacceptable. And so what we need to do is do the things that the legislature has the power to do, and make sure that we're doing it to the fullest extent of our ability so that we can protect the most vulnerable New Jerseyans.
The ACLU is very open about legislation that they support, right? They even don't hesitate to write advisory letters to Congress or state legislatures. So, considering that kind of openness, would it be fair to say that Congresswoman Sherrill and Congressman Gottheimer are actively working against the goals of the ACLU, and maybe even actively working against the rights of immigrants and New Jerseyans?
No, I don't think that's fair to say. I think, look, at the ACLU, we're a nonpartisan organization, and we have no friends and no enemies, as they say, right? Like, we are consistently trying to live by our principles, and trying to execute on those principles through legislation and litigation. And there's no elected office holder, and there is no candidate for office that satisfies us 100%. That is fully values aligned with us. There are instances where lawmakers of all stripes disappoint us, and there are instances where lawmakers that we wouldn't expect to align with us align with us. And so, we find common ground with unlikely partners all the time. And we also are disappointed by some of the people that we consider to be our champions. And
Yeah.
so our work is to make sure that we are advocating to people in positions of power to champion civil rights and liberties and defend the rights and liberties of New Jerseyans and everybody across the country. And I think we've been a hugely successful organization with our partners because of our commitment to our principles. And we're, I pride myself and my organization on the fact that we are an honest broker. We say the same thing to everybody on any issue. We articulate what our position is. We're not shy about telling you when we disagree. And so it's, I think it's important to note that, regardless of who the next governor of New Jersey is, whether it's, the Democratic nominee, Mikie Sherrill, or whether it's the Republican nominee, Jack Ciattarelli, we will strive to hold that person accountable. And also we will strive to work with them to make sure that we're defending the rights and liberties of New Jerseyans. We've
Yeah.
sued under every administration in New Jersey, and we've sued under every presidential administration, regardless of their party ideology. And so we expect to continue doing that.
And I completely hear you. And I think you're exactly right, considering the history of the ACLU. It is a nonpartisan organization, and it has been honest in the way it advocates. But it's undeniable that certain politicians can make your job harder. And I hear what you say about politicians not always aligning up with you. But when a likely ally fails you over and over again, it becomes a bit more than. And I just want to stick a pin in that because I want to come back to that when we're talking about our next topic of speech and ask you about some of the external influences regarding the Immigration Trust Act. Now, the Kitchen Table Conservatives PAC has been throwing money into New Jersey politics for a long time. And I think there recently, there's a lot of attack ads that are anti-immigrant in nature. They haven't specifically targeted the Immigrant Trust Act, but they have helped develop a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment, equating all immigrants with violent crime. And there's also the GEO group who owns Delaney Hall, and there's Core Civic. These are major ICE contractors. They're major Trump campaign donors, and it's very obvious that it's in their financial benefit to lock up as many people as possible, both in the immigration context and the criminal context, right? So whether it's the organizations themselves or politicians who may or may not take donations from them, what are your strategies in terms of lobbying?
So we, first of all, thank you for the question. We develop and hold expertise on issues, right? Like, and we try to be as well versed on the issues as possible, so that we can have conversations with everybody on the issue, regardless of where they fall on the ideological spectrum. There are going to be people who need to be convinced and can be convinced, and there are going to be people who cannot be convinced, and we're not going to have an audience with, and we're just going to have to disagree.
Yeah.
And so when there are people who are, say, taking money from the Geo Group or any other group that facilitates immigration detention, that's an articulation of where their values are, right? And it's when it's public, we know that there are institutions that are trying to uh, benefit from the incarceration of people and trying to separate families, and there are lawmakers that are complicit in that or actively trying to do it as well. And so, what we're trying to do is to uphold our principles. Like I said, we're not afraid to disagree, and so I think that there ought to be a political consequence to people to lawmakers who are hostile to civil rights and liberties and actually harm their constituents. And we're going to make sure that there is, right. And so we are doing things, whether it's organizing people, registering people to vote, making sure that people have a voice in their communities. We are utilizing, our platform in the media. We're utilizing social media as well to champion our principles and hold people accountable to them. And our lobbying strategy includes developing the expertise, having the meetings that we need to have, securing the champions, and also thinking about the consequences for not doing right by your constituents. How do we make sure that our voices are felt,
Yeah.
and that that the people power that we're trying to generate across communities in the state is seen. And so that's a constant part of our work. And
Yeah.
also, I will say, look, like I mentioned, we use this model of integrated advocacy. We also have a one of the best litigation departments in the state and in the country. And so when we have lawmakers that are hostile to civil rights and liberties that pass laws that are undermining people's rights and liberties, we will try to protect them through the courts as well.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that answer.
Hey there, if you liked that video, then subscribe to my channel, click on the link in my bio to follow me on Instagram, X, and more.